The Martian. What? What? No, not that type of Martian. Like the book. The Martian? Anyways, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Josh Hill and I'm here to tell you about The Martian. The Martian is a very intense and suspenseful novel that has many interesting characters. It is set in the near future and takes place on Mars. The main character of this novel is an astronaut named Mark Watney. He is also a botanist and he gets left behind on Mars. Next up is Mark's entire crew. This crew consists of astronauts Beck, Lewis, Johansson, Vogel, and Martinez. Many of the important things that happen in this book also happen at NASA headquarters back on Earth. People back at NASA headquarters were very important to the plot as they worked to bring Mark Watney back home. This is Teddy Sanders, NASA's president. He helped to spread the word about Mark Watney's incident and worked to resolve the issue. Next is Rich Purnell, a small NASA employee with big ideas. He actually helped bring the crew back home. Mindy Park. Mindy Park is a NASA telecommunications employee and helped to get in touch with Mark Watney. Lastly, for the NASA employees is Annie Montrose. Annie Montrose is a public relations director. She helped to inform the public that everything was okay and Mark Watney would return home safely. The plot. The Martian is a thrilling space adventure that sets off in the near future. It starts off on a space exploration mission with Mark Watney and his crew. During their mission, a freak sandstorm interrupts communications between the crew members and they must head back to the ship. Mark hits his head and gets knocked out, causing his crew to think he got lost and died. Astronauts Beck, Lewis, Johansson, Vogel, and Martinez evacuate Mars, leaving Mark behind. Mark then wakes up and realizes how bad his situation really is. He knew that he needed food and water to survive and needs to last until the next Mars mission, nearly a year away. Mark knew that the amount of food that his crew brought up with them would not be enough to sustain him for an entire year, so he knew he needed to grow some in the Mars soil. He began planting potatoes in the Mars soil and using the leftover oxygen from the oxygenator to turn back into water to help grow the plants. The growth of Mark's potatoes were very good, and he knew that he could last a long time on the potatoes and the leftover food from his mission. Mark knew he needed to survive and get home to tell the tale. Mark realized he needed a way to tell NASA that he was still alive. He used parts from his rovers and an old rover that was on Mars to send pictures back to NASA headquarters. Eventually, NASA found out that he was still alive and they told the press about it. NASA knew that they needed to get Mark Watney home or it would be a bad reputation for NASA. NASA employees knew that they had to get to Mark Watney before he starved to death. And this man named Rich Purnell, remember I said he had big ideas? Yeah, he helped get Mark Watney home. He created something called the Purnell Maneuver. It required Mark's crew to head back to Mars but use Earth's orbit as a slingshot and go back to Mars even faster. Back on Mars, Mark's plants were growing phenomenally. That is, up until the excess oxygen produced by the plants got highly explosive in the small hab and let off a huge explosion that actually injured Mark and slowed down his progress. This large explosion caused Mark to have to regrow most of his plants and fix up the hab so that it was livable. After Mark regrows his crops, he finds out from NASA that the Ares 4 mission will be several thousands of kilometers away from where he is. This mission is called Ares 4 because the exploration mission that Mark and his crew were on was the Ares 3, and they're going back to retrieve Mark. Mark had to rig up the rover with tons of parts from the other rovers and put extra stuff on it for extra battery life and to bring food. Mark makes it to the old rocket. It will not have enough power to get him into orbit, so he has to strip down the launch vehicle. He has to take off the roof and take out all the chairs and unneeded control panels to make it light enough to lift up into space. The rocket launch was very sketchy and scary. Mark was very scared and had to pray for his life. He knew that if he executed this perfectly, then he could make it home alive. Mark's crew was highly trained and was able to dock Mark's ship on the Ares 4. Mark was so glad to see his crew members and was ready for the 7-month trip back home. Lastly, the review. Overall, The Martian was a great book. I would give it about an 8 out of 10, and I would definitely recommend it to my friends and family and a few other people if they asked me if it was a good book. The book was very thrilling and suspenseful, but I think it had some minor pacing issues. Like sometimes Mark would be just on Mars watching like 70s disco, no, listening to 70s disco music and watching like old TV shows that their Commander Lewis brought with them. And he was like talking about how he was bored and stuff like that. And I think that was like okay for like page fillers, but eventually it starts to get boring between all the other stuff that's happening on Mars and back on Earth with NASA headquarters, and sometimes it got really boring to read through multiple pages of just Mark sitting in his hab eating potatoes and like complaining about how he's running out of ketchup and stuff.